the streets are quiet. You can hear Giorgio crying. They say the castle is haunted.
If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself for the podcast?
Sure. I am Andrew Gigan. I am the vocalist and what is sometimes is referred to as a guitar player for the band Castle Freak, located in the soon-to-be epicenter of the coronavirus, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
And how would you describe the music of Castle Freak?
Well, I'd say that probably one part death metal, one part grindcore, one part punk.
So, Andrew, thanks for speaking to me. Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast.
Happy to be here.
Let's start by going over the background of your band a little bit. When did you form, and what were your goals at the time?
So we started in 2012. I had just gotten off a tour with another band called Cape of Bats. They're another Philadelphia band. And it was kind of an idea that me and my buddy Frank had, that we were going to kind of do like a proto death metal band, kind of like in the vein of Repulsion and Necrovore was another one. What ended up happening is Frank is a dual citizen for Ireland and the US. So he ended up moving back to Ireland for university. But I liked the idea a lot, and I kind of always wanted to do that, so I ran with it. And the goals at the time were kind of just like have fun with it. It was to be a passion project, and it still is. We don't take it terribly seriously. That's just kind of where it came from.
So from the very beginning, you had a good idea of what kind of music you wanted to make.
Oh yeah. Since I was maybe a junior in high school, I always wanted to do a death metal band with a little more like grindy influence. Unfortunately, in the area where I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, there wasn't really anybody who was into that kind of stuff. It was mostly like hardcore bands and punk bands, and that's where I got my start early on.
Why that style? Why proto death metal?
Okay, yeah, you know what? I can trace it back. Let's figure this out. So the first band that really like got me into not so much extreme music, but I guess more like outsider music was the Misfits, and all of their songs were about like horror movies and like cool stuff like that. And I really liked that concept, so I decided that I wanted to play music that paid homage to kind of more violent pop culture oriented material. And that's pretty much what I've been doing since I was that age. Like even just doing like little projects in my bedroom, it was always that. It was always horror movies and like violent video games and stuff like that.
So, since we're talking about pop culture influences, we should mention your name and the misconception about where you guys got your name from.
Oh, let's close that door real quick. So the name Castle Freak, it's funny. When me and Frank were sitting in my bedroom coming up with this idea on a summer's eve, he was like, "Hey, it'd be like a really cool name for a band, like Castle Freak." And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds sick." And he's like, "Let's look it up on Metalum and make sure it's not already a band name." So we did, and then we started getting like all these pop-ups. It's like horror movie, Castle Freak, horror movie, Castle Freak. And I was like, "Oh, I've never heard of that." So we are not named after the movie Castle Freak. I do want to say R.I.P. Stuart Gordon. So it's sad that he's gone. I love Reanimator and From Beyond. Those are two of my favorites. But I've got a little bit of a vendetta against Castle Freak now.
So, you mentioned forming this band with Frank. Obviously, you guys have gone through some lineup changes since then.
Oh, it's a revolving door.
Yeah. Currently in the band, you're working with Sebastian from Noisem and Ben, who's also in the band No Mas. How did they get involved with this?
Oh, so let's see. 2000, whenever Human Hive came out, let's see, that was like 2016, I think. So there, again, a different lineup. So there was another guy in the band, Zach. If you want to know what he's up to, you can check out the band Outer Heaven. He knew Sebastian, I guess, from back in the day. And he said, like, we went through a lineup change. And so we were looking for a new drummer. And Zach said, "Hey, remember Sebastian? Like, you met him, I think, when Noisem played Philly." And I said, "Yeah, but he's like a guitar player, right?" And he goes, "No, he is a guitar player, but he's also very good at drums." Turns out Sebastian was very good at drums. And I guess his condition for joining Castle Freak was that, hey, it's kind of a package deal. Like, I'll come if my buddy Ben can come too. And I'm really glad he came up with that, because they're like two of my best friends now, and we're just having a great time making music. That's how that came out.
So we should point out, well, first of all, I should state that I've interviewed Sebastian for the podcast. He was nice enough to sit with me some years back with the rest of Noisem. And I interviewed somebody from No Mas. I'm not sure if it was Ben, but somebody from No Mas did a Q&A with me for the blog. But both Sebastian and Ben are based in Baltimore. Logistically, how does that work? How do you guys record and practice?
Well, first things first, I did listen to that episode earlier today. Very fun. Go back and look for that. So Baltimore is about 100 miles away from Philadelphia, which is not, crazy. So I have like a full-time job, so it does kind of make it a little bit hard to get out there. But maybe we had it going when we were recording. That was like every other weekend I would drive down there, and we would hang out at Sebastian's house and work on the album and practice and get our material together. And that's just kind of how we've been playing it. It used to be that me and Zach would go down together, but the funny thing about driving by yourself for 100 miles is you really have to get introspective. I can't tell you how many times I've had to sit through the Persona 5 soundtrack, because that's the only thing in my car.
Besides the long drive, does the distance between the three of you affect the way you guys work in any way?
Yeah, it's kind of like every moment really matters when we're actually like working on stuff, and a little bit of it's bullshit, because that's just the way that being in a band works. You want to hang out and have a good time with your friends, but we really have to make that time count.
So I think working with Sebastian is an interesting choice, because I wouldn't say that Castle Freak and Noisem necessarily sound alike, but you guys come from a similar place in terms of old school death metal, old grind like Repulsion, and a kind of punky approach to the way you guys write songs and record.
Yeah, and I think that's why it works so well, is because I found a bit of not just Sebastian but Ben too. I found a kindred spirit in them. That's like working with them has been super awesome. And when we go to work on stuff, they're super receptive, and they always want to let's see what's going on with the band. I really couldn't have asked for two more like-minded people to be in a band with, and I'm super grateful that they decided that I was good enough to stick around with them.
Now, in terms of the music or the sound of the band, has that changed at all since Sebastian and Ben joined the band?
I'd still say that I'm still writing the lion's share of the material that we're putting out. So I'd say only as much as I've progressed in my career as writing music.
About a week ago, you put out the first full-length Castle Freak album called Savage Nights of the Castle Freak. Tell me about this album.
The album is actually 7 years of my life kind of just rolled into a ball. So there's material on that goes back to 2012, and then it goes all the way through our career. Like there's re-recordings on it, and then there's, I'd say, maybe an equal amount of new songs, and you can really kind of follow my career if you look at it closely when it comes to writing music and how I approach that. It is like a little bit different. Like you can hear me like getting better at composing, and I think that's like kind of cool if people are looking for that. Obviously they're not, because like who does that? But if you wanted to, you can go and you can look at it like that, and I think that's pretty cool.
The album has a mix of new material and re-recordings of stuff from your demo and your two previous EPs. How would you compare the album as a whole to your two previous EPs? I mean, obviously with, some older songs on the recording, your old material and your new material sit comfortably side by side. But beyond that, would you say there's a big difference?
I'd say maybe a little bit, maybe just a little bit of a difference. I think that you can, it still has like that, I guess what you could call a Castle Freak feel to it. And that's really what's important to me, is when I'm trying to come up with stuff, I go, what's that Castle Freak feel? What's that quote unquote grinding death punk sound that I want to cultivate in this? And I think that they do kind of sit pretty well next to each other. Lyrically, when you look at the lyrics, some are like more mature than others, because, I was like 20, 21 when I wrote a lot of that early stuff. And I think you can kind of see me coming together a little bit more as a lyricist moving forward.
Where was the album recorded?
It was recorded at a audio recording facility called HARF. It is located in Baltimore. It was recorded by Sebastian himself. He mixed most of it. We had to send it out for mastering. It's better for me that way when someone in the band is working on it, because I feel more comfortable like that. I guess I like to have a little bit of control over like how things are going, and I like to see it happen. So it was kind of nice to have Sebastian working on it there and kind of walking me through the recording process and how he was doing stuff. I don't remember much of it, but it was nice to have that in the process.
You mentioned you sent it out for mastering. Who mastered it?
I think his name was Rob. I think it was someone that Sebastian knew. I'm not really sure what his whole deal was.
So you ended up self-releasing this, is that correct?
Yep. Well, we finished recording the album about a year ago, and because our schedules are so busy, we kind of didn't have time to like shop it out and like try to get some, some backing behind it. And there was like a few little nibbles here and there in the past year, but once this well, I don't want to say I took advantage of a pandemic, but I thought, man, maybe it'd be good to release this now, and then maybe someone will like see it and they'll want to help us release it for realsies. So far, no luck, but I'd say that it was the right time to release it, and we kind of talked about it, and we were like, this is probably the time that we're going to put this thing out, now or never kind of deal. And I guess I'm glad that we did. I guess I'm just glad that we got it out there. It's really not about making it big so much for the Castle Freak crew, because this is a passion project. It's kind of just something that we do for fun. We're not really looking to have like a big support of it. We're kind of just putting it out there for the people who want to listen to it.
And you've self-released all your releases up to this point, right?
I think so. It's kind of hard to think going back. I mean, yeah, you know what? We did self-release Human Hive. I'm pretty yeah. I think all of them were self-released. Yeah, you're probably right.
But if given a choice to work with a label, is there anybody you'd want to work with?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, if I was approached by someone, I'd say yeah, but I don't know if I have like a dream label exactly.
I just spoke to a guy who runs his own label as well as self-releases his own music, and there are positives and negatives to self-releasing. I think we're entering an interesting phase in the music industry where I'm not sure labels are actually that necessary, if you know what I mean. It seems like most of the promotion for a band actually happens online through social media. Most of the previous print media is basically obsolete and going out of business and going out of not being published anymore, unfortunately. And so I think, between Bandcamp, Facebook, Instagram, a band has all the tools that they need to release and promote their own music. I don't know if that's how you feel about it.
I have a tremendous amount of respect for the small guys who definitely have like their own label and their own distro. I think that's super awesome. In all likelihood, that is probably the kind of person that I would want to work with. But it is 100% possible to gather a cult following without a label, just based on Bandcamp and social media alone. It's pretty crazy how that works, that you can kind of create your own campaign and like market it yourself. That's what I've been doing. I've been trying to like market it myself, not like in a big way, just ways that I think would kind of like, how would like a quote unquote smart punk guy do it? And I was like, oh, well, I'll have Castle Freak logo printed on lighters and I'll just like leave them at venues because everybody needs a lighter. Or like, let's release it when everybody's stuck in their houses because they can't leave and it's really boring, and maybe they'll just want to listen to this Castle Freak thing. Even people who don't like metal, maybe they'll see it and be like, what is this? And then click on it. I don't know. So it is pretty interesting to see how that's all going and like the coming decline of bigger labels.
Yeah, I feel like punk and metal bands are uniquely positioned to take advantage of the current climate, just because so much of the success of bands early on was due to word of mouth and tape trading and just DIY marketing and just getting your name out there, getting your music out there yourself. And so, now with all these tools through social media and, being able to put your music up yourself through streaming services, it feels like labels aren't, labels move slowly just because there's so many more considerations, and labels tend to have, not necessarily big staffs, but staffs of several people who need to be involved in the decision making. Whereas a band, or especially somebody like you who's mostly doing everything himself, can make those decisions on your own without the need to run it by a committee.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that I've been noticing. I think there is a little bit of a stigma still that, like, if you want to make it, you kind of have to have a big backing behind you. And that's true. But like I said, you can still 100% do it yourself. And that's, I think, the way that we're going to keep doing it. We march to the beat of our own drum. And I don't know, that's just always the way that like me and my friends did it. And I think that's the way that I'm going to keep doing it. Again, though, we're not really out there to make it big. We're just kind of doing our own thing, having fun, enjoying ourselves while it lasts.
So let's talk about your songwriting process a little bit, because if I'm not mistaken, you've been writing all of the material for Castle Freak up to this point.
Yeah, I've actually been writing Castle Freak kind of stuff since, I want to say, I was 21. I'd be down in my basement actually just kind of playing guitar riffs and then like trying my best to drum over them. I had like a really crappy like first act drum kit, but the way that I go into like when I want to write a song is, you could probably tell there's a little bit of a pattern that I follow to, that if you're like looking at the frets on the guitar, it's like that 1-4-5 progression. So I kind of feel like that sounds really evil. I'm not sure who I picked that up from. It might be Repulsion. I feel like they do that kind of stuff a lot. Like I think you can hear it in Helga Lost Her Head a little bit. But the thing that I tend to focus the most on is the lyrics. So when I used to go down to write the lyrics, I would like come up with like a cool idea in my head, or like I would see like the title of an episode or something, or I would like play a level in a video game, like, oh, that's got a sweet title. I'm gonna try to write a song about that. A really good example is we have a track called Beneath These Streets, which I wrote about the movie Chud, but the title is the first episode of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Interesting.
That's like the first episode title, and I was like, oh man, that's a killer title. I'm gonna write a song about that. Why it ended up being about Chud is a whole nother story onto its own. But it's like it's everything. It's from video games to movies I've seen to episodes of TV that I've watched. I mean, like even something as like mainstream as Walking Dead has been like kind of an influence on me. So actually, this is kind of weird or interesting. So I'll put it out there, but I would say that it's more so media that influences the music than actual music itself. So I would say that we've taken more influence from like Doom, the video game, than Death, the band, if that makes any sense. Actually, now that I'm like thinking about it, like, okay, another track, Vampire Killer, Castlevania song, sweet. I actually like reworked a riff from the soundtrack for Vampire Killer into our song Vampire Killer, which is a tribute to Castlevania in its own right, but I also pay a little bit of homage to Cape of Bats in that song. So that's like, I think that's kind of a unique way of going about it that maybe other death grind bands aren't going that way, is taking music from video game soundtracks and trying to incorporate it into our music. And Doom is kind of, this is getting so convoluted because Doom, the original soundtrack, takes so much from like Metallica and like bands of like the mid 90s, and they just kind of like rip that off and then make their sound, and then it comes out the other end in Castle Freaks. So that's like a really weird roundabout way that like all of this stuff is kind of connected.
So funny side note. Do you know there's a riff in the original Doom soundtrack that goes do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep, I do. It's at Doomsgate.
So
It's that Metallica riff.
yeah, so well, I didn't realize it was a Metallica riff, and Carcass have a riff that's incredibly similar to it as well. And truth is, I didn't remember that from Doom either. But the death metal band that I had when I was in college, I was trying to write kind of a Randy Rhoads-ish, like super, capital H, capital M heavy metal riff, and that's such a natural riff to write because of the descending scale. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That is kind of like a weird natural way to go. It's so weird how music works like that. That there's just things that like when you think of a chord, when you think of a music chord, that's just like 3 notes or 2 notes or 4 notes that just sound super natural together. But when you look at a scale, it's any note 1 through 12 that just kind of sounds pleasing with those chords. Isn't that weird? Like it's like weird how that works.
Yeah. Anyways, long story short, without realizing that I'd ripped off both Doom and Carcass, I came up with a song, and that riff was the intro. And I swear to God, for 20 years, the 2 guys that I played with will not let me forget that I basically took a Carcass riff and stuck it at the beginning of one of my songs, which was unintentional, but
it happens to the best of us.
It does happen.
It has happened to me several times. Actually, there's a game series called F-Zero. If you've ever played Smash Bros, that's where Captain Falcon's from. Okay. There's a song on the Nintendo 64 game that was the F-Zero game that came out for N64. It's literally a Carcass song. I've played them side by side, and it's the same song. I can't remember what song it is. It's off Heartwork.
Okay.
But it's so crazy. I think it might actually be Heartwork.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
So I got to listen to the album a few times, and the song that stuck out to me the most was Toxic Winds, just because it has that groove, but at the end you go into that D-beat hardcore section. Tell me about the writing of that, and maybe putting together influences like that don't necessarily sound like they should go together, but end up sounding.
So that's a very early Castle Freak song, back when I wasn't really thinking about how riffs are supposed to connect. I mean, when you listen to our stuff closely, you'll realize that we like don't have a single bridge. I don't know what a bridge is. I'm not trained properly to write music. It's kind of just like just something I do. So with that, I think the first riff, I was kind of trying to play something that sounded like a little bit like Obituary.
Okay.
And then I just had that D beat part. That's just like a riff that I've been playing for a very long time. Like I had like a basement black metal band, as like everybody does, but I kind of had that riff in mind and I threw it in there and I was like, oh, okay, this one starts on the 2nd fret. This next riff starts on the 2nd fret. They should be together. Kind of like a Ross Diane type situation. And then like even when it goes into like the last part, it's super weird. Like that like, what is that? Like, where did that come from? It's just like a lot of like our early stuff, the riffs kind of just seem like they're Frankenstein together, but they work. And that's kind of what's important with music, I think, is when things work. Even if they don't make sense, they work. And I think that's a lot of what my writing style is like, this shit doesn't make any sense, but it kind of works. Let's keep it. And that's just how I've always done it. That's just always how I felt comfortable. So that's how that one kind of got glued together like a Frankenstein monster.
Yeah, I mean it's cool because like you have kind of this autopsy-ish groove in a lot of songs. And without knowing too much of your songwriting process or your background, like I could almost see like the 6 levels of separation or whatever it's called, where it's like, well,
yeah.
Autopsy had kind of a Sabbath thing, and then so you go from Autopsy to Sabbath, but then Autopsy also had this grind thing, and grind came from hardcore, and then so you go from this kind of groovy, as you said, Obituary. I was thinking a little bit like Soylent Green used to do these like big kind of just very like big Sabbathy kind of grooves in some of their songs, and then they'd go into a grind part, and that's kind of what Toxic Winds reminds me of. It's like you've got this big groove, and then you go into this D beat part, and so like just from the pool of your influences, you can see the Venn diagram of where all those things would link together. But when you're hearing it in the song, and it really hits you, it's just like, oh, where did that come from? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's all 100% accidental. And that's the way the cookie crumbles, is that it's just like everything is all just like accidental synchronicities. I think that's the word for it. Where it's just kind of like, oh yeah, that goes together for some reason. And like when you listen to like Castle Freak like all the way through, like that's just what everything is. It's like, oh yeah, these things go together for some reason. Even with like some of our newer songs, like I guess like Knee Deep in the Dead, speaking of Doom, a lot of those riffs are kind of just like, so there's this band from Portland, Splatterhouse, who I'm like super into, and I was listening to them and I was like, oh, they kind of do that too, where it's like it'll be like a really fast like thrashy part, and then it'll like wind up going into like a slam part. And I think maybe that's a little bit where that comes from, is like that like Portland area death metal stuff. So like Frightmare and Blood Freak, and I guess like Splatterhouse finds its way in there too, is like where there is just like, it is just like throwing shit at a wall and being like, did it stick? Maybe. And then that's the way the song comes out. I think that's a pretty cool way to do it. Like, I think some people go in with like a full skeleton and like a full layout of like what they want to do. And I don't think we've ever really done that.
It's interesting because I also think, I mean, I don't know, I'm not that familiar with the bands that you just mentioned, but I also think there's a generational divide where, coming from the era I came from, it was very rare and almost taboo to like throw in like a hardcore kind of part into a thrash song or a death metal song. But I think there's a generation that came up listening to all these things together because there was no separation at the record store. There was no separation because everyone was getting all this stuff at the same time through YouTube, and so it was all kind of assimilated together. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's no reason to think that Obituary and Discharge would be different kinds of music.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how I feel about it too. Is that like I guess that is part of my process where it's just like, I can probably think of a better example, but we'll use Toxic Winds, where it's just like, yeah, we'll do like an autopsy part, then we'll go into like the D beat part, back to autopsy, back to discharge, which is kind of like a poppy progression where it's like verse, chorus. And then we're going to go into like a really cool, like almost like Weekend Nachos. Nah, that's not a right reference, but like more like a hardcore part at the end. I think Rats in the Morgue kind of works in a similar way where it's just like you're grinding, then you're thrashing, then you're grinding, and then there's like a beatdown part at the end or like a mosh part at the end. And I think that breaking down those boundaries is kind of another thing that's big for me in Castle Freak. It's just kind of like, I don't want to say we transcend genre, but that's a pretty good way of putting it. I've just always called us like a death metal band, which is my own fault for putting those walls up.
I mean, I feel the same way. Like, I mean, I came to death metal at a weird time where bands like Carcass and Death were really pulling into this this new wave of British heavy metal and classic rock, these kind of influences.
Oh yeah, they were, weren't they?
Yeah, and so I never really thought of death metal as being this very limited thing where you had to sound like Scream Bloody Gore or you had to sound like Left Hand Path. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I've noticed that there is a little bit of a backlash against those kind of like we're death metal and we're nothing else kind of bands. Yes, they are getting like a lot of and I don't want to name names because that's kind of shitty, but like they are getting like popularity, and that's great because a lot of them work really hard. But there's a lot of kind of like weird backlash against like, oh, like this is like not like too death metal or like hardcore kids playing death metal. That's fine. Like I really don't have I'm not taking any umbrance with that. But it is kind of weird to see that like the more diverse you are with your sound, the more like I guess the underground is kind of receptive to you. Maybe it's like a changing of the guard or something, but it is kind of interesting to watch that unfold. I don't know if you've seen anything like that.
I haven't, but you know what? I've been expecting it for 10 years because as an old guy, I witnessed firsthand when bands like Carcass and Death were called, or, even Entombed, even Morbid Angel, when Domination came out, were called sellouts because they were incorporating other influences into their music.
So you kind of expected that the boot was going to be on the other foot.
Basically, yeah. And so when this old school revival came about, and you had, within a month, half a dozen or a dozen bands that all sounded like Left Hand Path, I was like, well, this already happened. I mean, if you look at between 1990 and 1992, you had a whole bunch of bands coming out of Sweden that all kind of sounded the same. And not just Sweden, you had bands coming out of Finland, Denmark, other parts of Europe that were all kind of doing that Entombed Dismember sound. And it's not sustainable. That's how you get an album like Amorphous' Elegy. That's when bands really start looking farther afield and drawing from different influences. And I would say that, and not to take shots at anybody, because I think as a musician, if you love that style so much that all you want to do is write 10 albums of just that style, and there are definitely bands that do that.
Yeah, for sure. It's a little bit of a disservice to themselves.
Yeah, I mean, if more power to them if that's what they're about. But I think when you see a band like Tribulation is one, and what was the other band? There's another band that came out like maybe around 2011, 2012. They were doing that kind of old school Swedish death metal thing that got pretty popular. And then within an album or two albums, they were immediately doing like strange avant-garde progressive metal. And like I said, I was kind of expecting it because I'd seen it happen once before. Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, that's what the aforementioned backlash I was talking about kind of pertains to, is that it is kind of those bands that are emulating Entombed, and it's like HM2s and like that kind of stuff. And it's a bit weird because that's kind of like what people have kind of come to expect from death metal, I guess, is like that Swedish sound. And that's fine, but like that's never really what I wanted to do. I wanted to sound like we were like in a basement. I wanted to sound like we were like kind of low budget, like the movies I watched growing up. More low budget, more like DIY, more punk. And that's just like what we do. I don't know if that's the right way to do it. I don't think there is a right way to do it. So it is kind of weird to see this backlash against people who are just doing what they want to do. But I get it, I guess. It is a little repetitive.
with the benefit of hindsight, I think the difference between being called boring and unoriginal and run of the mill and being called like fresh and old school and taking it back to the roots is about 8 years. I think there's a window of about 8 years where, if you get in under the wire, and whether it's old school hardcore or old school death metal or thrash or anything like that, even stoner rock and stuff like that, because I remember there was a backlash to that stuff as well. But if you get in right when, I guess, a previous generation has kind of aged out of the scene and aren't really buying records or going to shows anymore, and a new generation is coming in, then you're playing to an audience who are discovering this stuff for the first time, and it's all fresh and exciting to them. But then if you come in while that audience is starting to age out, and so we're going from like high school to college, basically. That's why I'm saying 8 years. Mm-hmm. If you get in while that audience is starting to age out, because they've already heard it, and because to a certain extent they've grown up on it, it's not fresh and exciting to them anymore. And so you have a harder time trying to make the case that what you're doing is valid.
I can 100% validate that viewpoint because I'm at that age where it's just like, had I gone to college, I'd be well out of that age group. So death metal has and extreme music to a certain degree has almost run its course for me to the point where it isn't as exciting as it used to be, and I have had to branch out and like, try to listen to other stuff. I listen to like a lot of video game soundtracks anymore. But you're absolutely right that like there is kind of like a deadline there where your audience is going to grow out of it. Almost. Not exactly. Like I feel like there are lifers out there, but there is like a definite obvious changing of the guard, I think happening right now.
Yeah. And I mean I don't obviously I don't want bands to like break up or, not sell records or anything like that. But I do think that it's kind of healthy to a certain extent where you have this cull within the scene, and then certain bands are going to survive and certain bands aren't. And I think, an interesting example is Exhumed, because Exhumed were almost 5 years too late playing the music that they were playing when they first came out. This kind of old school gore grind, early Carcass kind of style. But because they released their first couple albums when the bands that had pioneered that style had either changed their sound or broken up or were otherwise not active, there was a real hunger for it from people who'd grown up on that sound and missed it. Missed it meaning, wanted to hear it again. And B, people who hadn't heard it before and were discovering it for the first time. And if you stick with something long enough, you go from being seen as, well, these guys are just doing Carcass, or these guys are just doing Repulsion, to being, these guys are veterans and they've been doing this for 20 years and, they're pioneers and they influence all these other bands. Like, a lot of times when I hear bands doing that style now, I'm not hearing Carcass and, I don't know, General Surgery and bands like that anymore. Like, really what I'm hearing is Exhumed. Like, Exhumed have really taken that style and making it their own. And so that every band that's doing that now are really taking their cues from Exhumed more than any other band.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I always thought Exhumed was like, not like at the same time as like Carcass, but like, or like around the same time, maybe like on the tail end of Carcass, which I guess they kind of were. Because I think Harv's been doing it since he was like 15 or something. So I guess like it would have been like towards the end there. But that is true. Like, yeah, I mean, I guess you do kind of, I mean, even on our stuff, like how we have like me doing the high vocals and then Ben doing the low vocals, but it's like alternated on verses, like I definitely got that from Exhumed.
Yeah.
So I can say that we're influenced by Carcass all I want, but who's really having the influence here?
Yeah. It's funny. Like, if you do something long enough, you kind of make it your own. And, I think, it's not really, it's a matter of just outlasting the haters, because I'll admit to being a hater for most of my life. And it's funny because there are bands that I really thought of as being just generic and boring and unoriginal. But because they kept at it, 10, 20 years down the line, you can't say that they weren't true to it. You know what I mean? Like, that was their style and that's what they wanted to do, and they just kept at it.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I kind of wonder who's going to end up being one of those bands from out of the crop that we got going right now. I know it's not going to be Castle Freak because everybody loves us.
Watch the movies, only come the pleasure that
So, as we alluded to a little bit, we're going through this coronavirus pandemic where I'm here in Malaysia. I'm under lockdown. I'm not allowed to leave my apartment until April 14th unless it's for, either an emergency or something like, going to get groceries or things like that. What's the situation like for you over in Philadelphia?
It's pretty identical. I was actually going to ask how that's going for you, because I guess it's bad everywhere, and the way it's looking is like it's really not going to get any better. I mean, out here in Philly, I look out the window and there's still people walking around doing life as they normally would, and I've been stuck inside this apartment for 7 days, and it's really catching up with me a little bit. Luckily, I do get to go back to work on Monday because I've been deemed essential, which is pretty cool. I've never been called essential before, so I'm pretty excited about that. They mailed me out a piece of paper that says like da 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 to whoever it may concern. Andrew is an essential part of our team, and if you pull him over, he can slap you in the face. So I'm pretty stoked about that. I've never had such magnificent power before.
So I've spoken to a lot of bands, and anybody who's following a band online has probably seen, tours being canceled, releases being delayed, things like that. You spoke briefly about how the pandemic pushed you to self-release this album. Has it affected Castle Freak's plans in any way? In any other way?
Luckily, no. I can't say the same for Nomas. I know they had to cancel a tour, which is such a bummer. For people like us in the underground, touring is like the best vacation ever. So it really sucks to see that torn away from them. I'm not so sure on Sebastian's end. I'm not really sure if Exhumed or Noisem had any plans, but I know Nomas definitely had something canceled over that.
In general, do you guys play live a lot?
No. I think since we've reformed, I think that was like 2018, we played like 2 shows. It's not so much that it's like hard for us to get out there, but if we do have the time to get together, it was to work on the album or get new material down, and we had to be kind of picky about our time.
Yeah, with Sebastian in 2 other bands and Ben also in 2 other bands, it seems like the logistics of scheduling would be tough for you.
Very tough. It's but it's okay. I'd rather them do their real bands, and then like when they have free time, we can get together and we can play and like have fun. And that's kind of what I have Castle Freak here for. Is when we broke up the second time, they kind of came to me afterwards and like, hey, like let's do Castle Freak again, man. Like that was really fun for us. And I was like, oh, really? Like, oh, I guess they need like an outlet for like just to like that's like not so serious. And I was like, yeah, cool. All right. Well, if that's the case, we can definitely do it again. And that's kind of how we came back from the grave the second time. And we have like a very Jason Voorhees repertoire of coming back from the grave. It's hopefully we don't have to do that again.
Wish for the best, but in the event that they aren't able to continue with Castle Freak, you're still going to go on, right?
Oh, if they couldn't do it anymore, we go on. No, I don't think so. I think that'd probably be it for us.
Really?
Yeah. For me, Castle Freak, like it is fun, but I think after all of these lineup changes and after all of this time that we've put into it together with them two, I don't know if I really want to do it with anybody else, because I've been having so much fun with them. I don't know if they're replaceable. I really don't feel like they are. And they're both so ungodly talented. It's amazing. They say you can only be as strong as your weakest link. Well, if the person writing the material is the weakest link, you have nothing to worry about.
Tell me a little bit about Philadelphia, because I'm not that familiar with the scene. The only band I'm really that familiar with from the area is Starkweather.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. So we have a pretty mixed crowd. There's a lot of punk, there's a lot of hardcore, but at the same time, there's a decent amount of metal and like a little bit of a growing grind scene, which is pretty cool. Some of like the real good bands coming out of here right now, I say like Coffin Dust. Coffin Dust has always been one of my favorite bands. They kind of have a little bit of that Exhumed vibe to them. Their vocalist Matt was in Exhumed for a little bit, playing bass. We've got a great grind band, Covered in Sores. They're doing awesome. Devil Masters from Philly. So the scene is pretty diverse. Unfortunately, because of my job, I don't have nearly as much time as I'd like to go out and like see these bands live, but I've been kind of following them online. Again, going back to how you can kind of create a following online without needing anybody. So it is cool to kind of see like that the scene's really thriving. It's doing well. got some cool venues.
Yeah, Kung Fu Neckties in Philly, right?
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, that's in I think that's Fishtown. I want to say it's Fishtown, which like talk about a weird name for a neighborhood. Fishtown. Come on.
So the first full-length Castle Freak album is called Savage Nights of the Castle Freak. It's out now, and tell people how they can get it.
How to get it? Well, so it's very easy. You can log on to bandcamp.castlefreak.com. I think actually let me double check that URL because yep, that is castlefreak.bandcamp.com. You can download it there. It is 100% free unless you feel like giving me money. And that is how you can get our album. Hopefully in the future, we will have it out physically till this pandemic has been laid to rest a little more indefinitely. It'll just be digital for now. Hopefully we can get it into people's hands sooner than later.
And if people want to follow Castle Freak, how can they do that?
You can follow us on Facebook at, I want to say, Castle Freak. Yeah, facebook.com/Castle Freak Philly. You can follow us there. It's not updated too often, but sometimes I'll post on there about stuff we have going on. Our social media presence is a bit of a crawl, but I think it is worth it once we put the music out. That's what we're really all about, is we're getting that music to you.
Is there anything else you want to say?
I have a one-man synthwave project that I would really like to plug, if that's okay with you.
100%. Go for it.
Awesome. So you can find that over at interceptor1.bandcamp.com. I should have a new release for that out hopefully this week. You can kind of, again, see my progression as a composer on that. You can see my mixing skills. They are not very good, but I'd be ever so grateful if you wanted to check it out. And that's really all I have to plug.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Oh, hey, no problem. It was my pleasure. I had a great time. Hopefully you did too.